Hey growers, Jordan River here with more GrowCast. Thank you for tuning in today. Shane is back from MIGRO, and you guessed it, he reactivated his GrowCast promo code. Have you been thinking about picking him up? You're in for a surprise. He also talks about efficiency with lights, his recent light lists that he's published, too much light, a really solid all-around lighting episode in store for you guys today. Before we jump in with Shane, though, got to give some love to Plant Success, aka Plant Revolution. Go to plantrevolution.com to find more, but find them in your local hydro store and add them to your grow. I'm sure they're in there. You've seen their Great White line of products. Their Great White is their granular myco, a great myco choice. Their Orca is their liquid myco, a staple in my garden. And their King Crab is an even bigger staple in my garden, a highly concentrated, beneficial bacteria additive that is loaded with beneficial microbes. If you listen to that episode, you know the wide variety of microbes that are in there and what they do, but I'll just tell you, it's like a quick shot of compost tea. It's like an Insta prayer with that King Crab and all of the Plant Success line. So special thanks to Plant Success. We are proud partners. Find them in your local hydro store, everybody. Plant Success, aka Plant Revolution. Try the King Crab. You won't regret it. And stay tuned for giveaways going down shortly with Plant Success. All right, let's get into today's episode with Shane from MIGRO. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show. Hello, podcast listeners. You are now listening to GrowCast. I'm your host, Jordan River, and I want to thank you for tuning in today. Before we get started, please share GrowCast. Spread the show. It's how we grow. Make sure you're subscribed. Give us a good rating and review. I do appreciate it. All of you. Today we have return guest, light testing expert, and creator of the MIGRO light line. Shane from MIGRO is on the line. What up, Shane? How you doing?
Jordan, I'm doing very, very well, and I'm delighted to be back on with you.
Yeah, buddy. How you been? I know some big things have happened since we last spoke. You moved into a new space. You're crushing it with MIGRO. Update us, would you?
Yeah, it's been a really busy period. We moved into a new premises back in December, so kind of settling in here nicely. Business has been growing, taking on a few new guys. The array range has been doing really well, so I'm really delighted with that. And onwards and upwards. I think we released the Pro version since we last spoke, so higher efficiency, same format but higher efficiency. That's selling really well. It seems everybody wants the highest efficiency in the market, and that's what they're pushing for. So we're facilitating as best we can. And yes, we did a lot of testing as well. I have a huge pile of lights still to get through. So that's been going really well. I'm getting them out as quickly as I can. And seeing a lot of good new lights on the market too. So it's very exciting times.
Oh, man. Yeah, I have a couple brands that I want to chat to you about, but we have so much to get into before that. Right off the bat, though, I hear you were kind enough to reactivate a certain promo code until the end of May. Is that the case? Can you tell my audience about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we did it before. We're going to do it again. It's a discount code for customers. It's 5% off all of the MIGRO products. So the array range, in particular, all the LEDs, all sizes and shapes from 120 watt up to 720 watt packages. And no strings attached. Just enter the code GrowCast in the coupon box when you're checking out to get your 5% discount. And very, very happy to be doing it in partnership with yourself and GrowCast. Always find the your followers and contributors when they come to us are the nicest of people. So it's been a very pleasant experience, and I'm looking forward to doing it again.
Awesome, man. That's incredible. And I don't want to, put you on the spot or anything, but I believe this is like the only MIGRO code out there currently. Is that correct?
It will be. Yeah.
That's what I love. Enjoy, listeners. Welcome to the GrowCast universe. Thank you, Shane. We do appreciate that, man. Really, really dope. And that's active until the end of May. So jump on at code GrowCast at migrolight.com, MIGRO light.com. Subscribe to MIGRO's YouTube page to see all his light testing videos. Very, very comprehensive and an extensive library of videos there. So if you're a new listener, definitely check out Shane's YouTube page. Didn't you just drop a video that was the culmination of a lot of research, and you just dropped a big one, right?
Yeah, it's nicely timed, actually, our chat today. Just about a week ago, I launched a video, or released a video, which is the best small grow light 2021.
Nice. That's what it was.
So, yeah, specifically around 2 foot by 2 foot grow areas. So, the either starter growers or sort of closet or stealth growers in particular, and 50 to 150 watt range. But there's 17 lights in all on the comparison being compared, and give it a full sweep. So go through spectrum, power output. That's the amount of useful light for plants. The fixtures output, their efficiency, quality, and then compare their running cost. And also, just for reference point, because there's quite a few people out there still running CFLs and HPS and CMH and those type of lights, and even compact fluorescence, and showing the comparison and demonstrating to people why it's worthwhile now to think about upgrading to LED from those older technologies, because they really are getting well surpassed now with the modern LED technology.
Right. I want to dig into so many aspects of what you just said, but first, can you give an overview of the results? I know MIGRO, it's funny because when you do these lists, we can tell that you're unbiased because MIGRO never tops the list, except this time, when you add it all together, this is the first time where MIGRO has actually landed right at the top, right?
Yeah. I was quite off-put and perturbed by the fact that I got a few comments that I was when I posted it, that I was only doing it to market myself and all that stuff. And I said, well, I've been doing a very bad job for the last 5 years of doing that, because I've never bloody got to the.
They're new followers, dude. They must be new to the MIGRO channel, because you put out all this. You've literally never been at the top, but then they stumble across their page and they go, "Look at this guy putting his products right at the top of the list."
Yeah. So I gave them a swift, short, curt answer that polite, of course, but to the point. Just to say, look, sometimes I might just legitimately get to the top of one of these lists, and in this case, it is true. And there's actually two lists on this review video. So there's one just for pure efficiency, which is a metric that we always look at. And then the other one is for total cost of ownership over 3 years. Oh. So it's looking at the cost of the fixture plus electricity cost and all that stuff. And we sort of we run a metric which enables you to compare lights which are of a different wattage and a different size and that sort of thing. And in that one, I'm not on the top. I'm very close to the top, but not at the top. But on the efficiency, I am, or the array ranges, I should say. And it is interesting because there are other grow lights in the larger wattage categories. So in the sort of 400 to 700 watt categories for 4x4s up to 5x5 grow tents, which are more efficient. But a lot of those companies don't have products in the smaller, lower wattage range.
Oh,
so
interesting.
Yeah, and I do clarify in the video because it's worth pointing out that there's lots of the bigger companies now, or the more the better performing lights, I should say, are don't enter into that smaller part of the market.
Interesting.
Yeah, they're more interested in the commercial stuff,
So everybody kind of stays in their lane. That's fascinating. Now, before we move into my questions, who else topped these lists? Who were you impressed with when you were taking a look at the best small grow lights for your video?
Yeah, I picked out two lights which I was impressed with. I've been impressed with over the last sort of year of testing. One of them was the Viper Spectra P1000.
Oh, wow.
So I'm just very impressed with that, just because of its price range. Really, it's a 100-watt light for $100. Nice. It's got pretty good efficiency. Its build quality is good. I've had, since posting videos on them, I've received lots of sort of comments back to say that they purchased the light and they're happy with it. It's a nice form. It's got all the bits and pieces you wanted. The LEDs are protected. It's got a silicone coating over them. So protected from dust and dirt and water and stuff. They got dimmer on board, really nice dimmer switch, and they're just a really nice, neat package. So that was my top pick for a budget light. And then also alongside of that, there's another company, Atrium Lighting. It's a US-based company.
Whoa.
And they produce a small fixture, again, the 100 watt sort of range. It's the Hydro 1000. And that, again, it's similar to the Viper Spectra, so just very straightforward, simple light, good build quality, and has higher efficiency than the Viper Spectra, but has nice little features in terms of the dimming, and you can control multiple units at the same time and that sort of stuff. So those two and the MIGRO Array 2, those three lights together were sort of bumping off with each other, or very close to each other at the top of that list.
Interesting. And that's the efficiency side, which I have notes on. But please move on to the other list. So
the cost, it's difficult to compare different sized grow lights for cost, because I suppose it's like comparing a van and a small car.
Hey, listen, I got an old beat up Fiat. It takes you from A to B. I don't really, but that's right. The argument. I see what you're saying. It's like comparing different cars. It's like, well, they both take you from A to B, but yours is missing the floor panels like a Flintstone car, and mine is a Maserati. So
exactly. And so, in order to try and level up, what I've done is I set them a target of achieving 750 micromoles. And that's a level of power intensity or light intensity, which is right up there. It's really optimizing the amount of yield you're going to get from that space. So going over 750 micromoles average is, you've got a sort of reducing rate of return after you go over that level. It's a pretty high level, and you're getting close to optimizing. So 750 micromoles in a 2 foot by 2 foot, you need X amount of micromoles coming from the fixture. And that was the target. And what I looked at was, how many fixtures would you need to achieve that target, and how much would it cost to run that many fixtures for that period of time?
Oh, that's an interesting calculation.
So if there was a fixture that achieved over it, it would have been a fraction of that number of fixtures. So, it could be 80% of the fixture. If it's a small fixture and it doesn't achieve that number, you could be using 1.2 fixtures or 1.25 fixtures. And it allows us to, as I said, level up the number of fixtures and the cost of running them to the same level between what would be otherwise, different output fixtures, and hard to compare.
Interesting. I like that. So you might even end up with a fraction of a light.
Correct.
Interesting.
Now, they were all in and around that target anyway. So usually they're a little bit over one fixture or a little bit under one fixture to achieve that target. There wasn't a huge amount of variance. But what's most important about it, I think, is that it shows you two basic things. First of all, it gives you really stark. We're showing the running cost over 3 years at a sort of 14-hour day, which is just a midpoint between veg and flowering times, and then at a 17 cent per kilowatt hour, which I know in the US the electricity cost for domestic consumers is all over the place. It varies widely.
Yeah.
But, it seems to be sort of a mid-range figure. And it shows the cost of buying that fixture and then running that fixture over 3 years. And what you can see is, as I said, two things. First one is that the cost of the modern LED fixtures is in all cases significantly cheaper, that total cost, than buying a HPS or CFL, or even what I did compare as well was sort of a generic blurple light.
Huh.
So the modern white LEDs that I have on review there far surpass all that older technology.
Wow.
And really, they're redundant now, and it really sort of hopefully draws a line under them a bit, and stops people buying them because they're just not worthwhile. And the second thing it says, within the modern LED range, you can spend a little bit up front, but generally you get slightly lower efficiency, and you end up paying the same, or in most cases more, over the lifetime of the product. So it's showing you that, or hopefully demonstrating that spending a little bit more upfront on a higher quality fixture with better components and higher efficiency will pays you back, and pays you back pretty quickly too.
Well, I want to say something, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe this is literally a mathematical kind of equation that I'm misunderstanding. But again, I think it really comes down to the individual gardener and their needs in the garden. However, I think sometimes people are focusing on the wrong thing. Let me throw this at you, and then you give me your opinion. So, for instance, you talk about these small grow lights, and I feel like people focus a lot on efficiency, as you said. But if you really think about it, if you're a small-time grower, you're pulling one light, let's say, the less energy you're pulling total, the less the efficiency really matters. Your electricity bill is not going to go up that much. What I'd be more focused on with the smaller lights is making sure that there's enough light output, that you're actually getting enough intensity of that light. That's what I'd worry about if someone was starting up and they said they were going to buy a $100 light. That's why I would recommend them to buy a MIGRO or something in that mid-range instead. Flip the script. I feel like people who buy high-end lights are so focused on output. They're like, what's the PPF? What's the PPF? And the truth is, most of these lights are way overkill unless you're using a ton of CO2 and or you're like in an industrial space and the lights are very, very high. I almost feel like the bigger grow room guys, the efficiency matters way more, and you're going to be able to achieve that PPF no matter what. Whereas a lot of the smaller time guys are focused on efficiency. But how efficient is your $12 a month increase in electricity bill? You need to make sure you're getting enough light to your plants so that you're yielding enough and getting a proper harvest. That's what's going to save you money. Am I making any sense there? And please push back if there's anything I missed.
Yeah, I suppose there's a couple of things to break down there. And first of all, I agree with you that the cost of electricity for the smaller grower with, say, a 2x2 running a 100-watt light is not huge. And it's not the major factor when deciding.
So don't get a P1000 because you think, it's as efficient as the MIGRO, because your MIGRO is a better light as far as output. And that's what I would recommend. Please correct me if I'm wrong and continue, but sorry.
Well, there's a couple of aspects to it. So, as I said, to take your argument and sort of turn it around a little bit, or to look at it from a different perspective, if I'm reading you correctly, is, if you got a 100-watt light from X company and you get whatever output, and for the same efficiency, or with the same efficiency, you get a 120-watt light. That what's more important is not really the increase in electricity, but it's the increase in light intensity.
Exactly.
And getting more yield.
Yep.
So I do agree with you. And one of the aspects from that aspect, one of the things that frustrates me still from some manufacturers, and I sort of highlighted a few of them when I was testing their lights and reviewing them and comparing them, is that they over specify their light. So they say, for example, it's for a 2.5 foot by 2.5 foot, whereas in reality, it's only really going to deliver you a good yield in a 2 foot by 2 foot space, for example. So one thing is badly specified lights, but there is other aspects to efficiency which may not be as obvious up front, and the biggest one is heat. So in a smaller setup with a small tent, and a lot of people doing micro grows and closet grows and all that stuff, heat is a big factor in that you've got a small space with a small volume of air, and a inefficient fixture will mean you'll have to be running high airflow to keep that space cool, and you end up with a lot of noise, basically, and that also affects your filters and your odor. So running much more efficient can significantly improve basically the stealth of your grow. But the other factor is that generally higher efficiency is not just achieved by sort of a manufacturer deciding it to be so. It happens because they specify their lights, basically over specify their lights. So the way that high efficiency is achieved is from LED terms is the you put more LEDs in there and you run them at lower current. And by running them at lower current, they run it more efficiently. So higher efficiency fixtures have more LEDs in them than lower efficiency ones. Right. And when LEDs are run at lower current, they last longer. So you get
that's cool.
Yeah, so you get a good indication, and it's the same, by the way, for the power supplies, the drivers. So a high efficiency driver will output less heat. So the inefficiency comes out in heat, and heat is the main factor in reliability of electronics. So if your driver is running very hot, a lower efficiency driver will run hotter, and if it's running hot, it won't last as long. So it's not just the number, the efficiency number that matters. It's the specification of the light, that the specification required to achieve that efficiency is much higher than a lower efficiency fixture.
Jeez, that makes a lot of sense.
That's
really
so
interesting.
I mean, you sort of know this from the analogy of cars or whatever. A better built car will generally be more fuel efficient because the components are better balanced, better specified, better toleranced, better tech. Yeah. So it's a simple number that, as you say, for a smaller grow, doesn't always jump out at you as immediately obvious why it's beneficial. I'll just add another 20 watts. So what? I'll still get the same light output, and I'll get the same yield, and that is true. But as I said, we particularly at MIGRO here, we try to be the best or up at the top end, in terms of everything.
Sure.
And it requires using the most expensive parts, the most expensive components, and more of them. And it's you get a properly specified light in terms of it will optimize the space that you're using it in. It'll give you a light intensity that will be sufficient to get a good yield, and you'll get, as I said, that low heat, low bills, and hopefully the longest life expectancy that you can hope for.
Yeah, that's killer. And really, what it comes down to for me with the MIGRO is the medium price point. You're filling this medium price point that is really important, because you can get a $900 light, you can get a $1,200 light, you can get a $100 light, but I like the MIGRO is like $300, $400, $500. I think like $450 might be one of your more expensive ones. Like that middle range is really, really perfect.
Yeah. We don't we go for quality components. We go for a simple design which allows those components to be more affordable, while still achieving everything that you want to achieve as a grower. So there's a lot of fixtures that I review, particularly in the larger fixture size, and they're very well built. So there's lots of components, lots of weight in them, lots of cross structures and bars and all these sorts of things. And what we've done is we've stripped out a lot of that, those components which don't add to the light output, and really pared it down to a simple, very ergonomic design. And what it means is you're getting high quality components, high performance, but for relatively low cost.
We'll be right back with Shane, but before that, Microbe Life, proud partners of Microbe Life Hydro. MicrobeLifeHydro.com is where you can find them. Use code MLHGrowcast to save 10% on your order, or find them in your local hydro store. Microbe Life. I use their Photo Plus, I use their Nourishell, I use their All-in-One. I love all of those products. They are fantastic. The Nourishell is a high-quality humic acid. Make sure you're using the good humic acid, not derived from Leonardite or any of the weird coal stuff. Use that good seabed or lake bed derived humic acid like Microbe Life's Nourish L. And of course, their Photo Plus, maybe my favorite product of theirs, full of lots of different beneficial microbes, all the way from mycorrhizal fungi to photosynthesizing bacteria. Check out the episode with Brett. Wonderful additives in your garden. MicrobeLifeHydro.com. Use code GROWCAST or find them in your local shop. All right, everybody, let's get back to Shane with MIGRO. Well, I think that's why it's good for a smaller home grow especially, but I want to dig into this subject a little bit further with you. Mm-hmm. It's interesting. I mentioned it before, talking about high output bars. I love my sexy red Photon Tech, of course, but I'm running into new issues with this thing that I haven't had before. Two things I want to dig into: too much light, having too much saturation of light, and then secondly, home testing, par meters, lux meters. Because my theory is, Shane, and I don't want to blow up your spot. Please correct me if you think I'm wrong, but people are posting, should I buy this par meter and then dial it in to a certain number? And the more I thought about it, man, the different cultivars will handle light very differently. As far as things that strains do differently, the level of light they can handle is actually one that I feel varies quite a bit. So I know there's like a general range of an ideal PPF, but to me, if it varies strain to strain, what is a par meter going to even help you? You need to look at your plant and see whether or not it's sick and turn it up basically as high as you can, ideally, without getting any of those stressors. Please correct me if you feel differently, but what do you think about that?
Yeah, so this is a very broad sort of broad area which encapsulates quite a few things. I suppose just to give people a reference point, most grow light manufacturers, certainly up to about a year and a half ago, or most grow lights, were specified to deliver about 500 micromoles of par, and that was an intensity which that's average across the grow area. Okay. And that intensity would be in line, for example, about having a 600 watt HPS in a 4x4 or a 1000 watt HPS in a 5x5. You get about 500 micromoles. Okay. And people now are, and there was a limiting factor there really, which was a lot of it was heat related. Mm-hmm. So, putting a 1000 watt HPS into a 4x4, for example,
gets too hot.
Yeah, so it wasn't necessarily the light intensity, it was more about the heat, and in particular because those fixtures were radiating heat as well as outputting heat. So there was a lot of radiated heat onto the upper leaves and that sort of thing, and a lot of singeing and drying out and bleaching and that type of thing. LEDs are slightly different. They don't output that infrared heat. Basically, they don't radiate heat as much, so you can put your hand up close to even a very intense LED system and you won't feel that heat on your hand, whereas if you put it up near to a HPS bulb, you'll feel that radiated heat onto your hand. So LEDs don't radiate that heat, but they also don't emit as much heat by convection or into the air as HPS would as well. So your modern comparison in terms of LED, you might be replacing your 600 watt HPS with about 400 watts of high efficiency LED. And that difference of 200 watts in power is mainly is a reduction in heat. That's the heat reduction that you get. So it's quite significant. You're reducing your heat by about half into the tent with modern LEDs, but you're also not getting radiated heat. Mm-hmm. So what people found was they put the same amount of power, the 400 watt fixture in, and they're getting a great yield, same as their HPS and all that stuff. But they went, well, what if I increase this? It seems like I could handle more, tents running at a good temperature, all that stuff.
The heat and they started lifted, right? So now we can up the intensity.
Correct. So that was the sort of first thing that started to happen, and then people started pushing with the intensity. And as I said earlier, we're up to probably, certainly my products we recommend are specified, or the area they're specified to work in, grow area is in the 750 to 800 micromole range average. So to push that intensity right up, so you're really optimizing the space for yield. And what's happened in the last year or so is that either growers or manufacturers, I'm not sure who's pushing who into it, but are starting to specify or demand up more like 1,000 micromoles. Now, in nature terms, so midday sun in the summer is about 2,000 micromoles. So we're talking about only half of that. But a lot of plants, are not designed or built to be under full sun all the time. As we know, if you do any gardening or anything like that, you'll have full sun plants, you'll have semi-shade plants.
Yeah, that's true. And then also plants have their mechanisms when it's just one focal point in the sky. My understanding is they can turn away, they can shift. It's not like that all that is being dropped, that 1,000, even half that is being dropped right on their heads where they have no escape.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that in particular. I'm not sure whether that has an overall. Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know, so I wouldn't comment on it because I don't know. But I know that from my own experience with LED, that for example with the old cob lights that I used to sell, they had quite a because they were coming from a central point and they were focused. If you got sort of within 6 inches of the bulb directly underneath, you'd be at about 1,500 par. And I know from my own experience and others that some strains could be that close and would not be affected. Right. So you would be getting that level of intensity all day. The thing is, though, we don't know whether you're getting a good rate of return in terms of growth. So is that actually all that power intensity? Is it all going into increased growth and yield? Right. And we don't know for sure. There's some research being done by a guy, Dr. Bruce Bugby, who's a grow lighting expert. He right. runs a sensor company called Apogee, and they are one of the few institutions. He's in Michigan University. He's one of the few institutions who are publishing studies, I should say, of of cannabis growing. They're looking at medicinal cannabis in particular, so CBD varieties, but they're also looking at regular varieties. And they've been pushing the power intensity up to 1,500 micromoles and still average and still showing a rate of return. That would be now with photoperiod strains. So it's on a 12-hour cycle.
So you need to increase that photon delivery as much as you can. And
well, you can do in some circumstances, but the caveats I'm going to put to this are a few. So there's the few that I would put out there is I think it is strain dependent, because I get customers who tell me it's getting 6 inches, it's getting 6 or 8 inches away from the thing and it's starting to burn and all this. And they're not fools, they're not liars. They are experiencing that. Right. And usually when I dip into it, it does appear to be strain related, that there are some that just cannot take that same light intensity. Another factor is, as I said, your rate of return. So, there's a curve, and the curve sort of flattens out once you get over maybe 800-900. So even with the best growers and the best, and strains that can take it and everything else, you start to get over maybe 700 or 800 micromoles in light intensity, and there's a couple of limiting factors start to occur. So CO2, you need to increase the CO2 levels in the grow room, and that's very difficult to do. You have to have a closed environment, which means that you're recirculating the air and using expensive equipment to monitor the CO2 levels and scrubbing it of moisture and all sorts of stuff. So that's a real high-tech solution, and it's very costly. And what was the other thing I was going to say?
Is there another limiting factor?
And then you take just simple things like water and nutrients and all that stuff. So your growing medium and the performance of your nutrients and everything else needs to be able to keep up with the light.
Of course. So
Yeah.
that's why these synthetic growers love the LEDs so much. They're probably experiencing a little bit less light stress because all of that nutrient availability. Whereas an organic guy like me, it seemed like as soon as the terp trip started gobbling through more of its food, that's when it started really feeling the power of the light. Man, Shane, that's dope, man. Thanks for that.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's I suppose it's I tried to explain it as like a bottleneck. That you might free up, you might increase the potential rate of growth by increasing your light intensity. But if your environment isn't dialed in, if you're medium, so soil typically underperforms compared to even cocoa, and then cocoa underperforms compared to hydroponics, etc.
This is new to me. I'm just joking.
So,
Continue, please.
so it's removing all of the bottlenecks so that you get to get the benefit of that high performance. My own personal view, and what I generally say to people if I'm talking to them about this, is it's like getting into an arms race for me doing that. You're just getting higher tech with everything, higher tech, and you're sort of putting complications on top of complications. I just say, look, if you want more yield, why not just have a slightly larger grow space? So just increase the area of your grow space. And
I'd agree with that. I think everybody has their own limiting factors, right? Like for some people, you can't increase the grow space, whether it's your wife or your state.
Oh, yeah.
But that you're right. As far as simple solutions, that's like the Wolfman answer. It's like, why don't you just throw up another tent? So I do agree with that, and I like that. But as with everything in growing, man, it's just whatever the single person's needs and values are. So
yep.
But yeah, I don't know. I see a lot of overpowered lights in general, and I see a lot of light stress in these Facebook groups. Usually from turning them up too fast too soon. And I'm thinking, that's why you need that onboard dial. That's why you need like I said, man, to be honest, Shane, I know you like to crap on the HPS, but one thing that's really easy about the HPS, and maybe this goes back to my point about the sun, it was very intuitive for me, maybe just because of my experience with it, to fix any light problems. You keep the HPS. I don't keep the HPS in the very center of my tent. I kind of move it over towards one corner, and the slime god, shout out Firebuds, sits right underneath because it's really loving the light and it's bathing in it. But the basil was getting too much. So all you do, since the HPS has such a bad light coverage, all you do is slide the basil away off towards the corner of the tent, right? And suddenly you lowered the intensity, and now the basil's doing fine. I actually struggled a little bit with this idea of all the light dropping straight down on my plants. And I know that's just me getting used to efficiency, but do you know what I'm saying?
I do. What I used to do, because I was with HPS, I have a low grow space, so I don't have a lot of head height. And so I used to have to do the sort of stadium effect thing where I would have the light in the center, and then all the plants sort of pulled around the edges.
The Thunderdome.
If there was any small plants, they'd go in the center because they'd be further away from the light intensity and all that stuff. But what I noticed when I switched over to LED and started getting that more even light distribution is just less variability in the plants and more consistency. And that consistency. So, for example, with the HPS, I would usually get a few plants that had monster big colas on them, big huge buds on them, and they were the ones that probably had got best exposure to the light over time.
Sure.
Whereas now I find the grow is more even. The individual there is few larger buds, but more medium-sized buds, you know what I mean? And they're more evenly distributed across all of the plants. And I find that to be higher performing overall. I don't have some plants that have an amazing yield and other ones that, particularly in the corners or where their sides were pointed away, or on the darker side of the light, have a lot of leafage and a fair amount of growth. But when you're harvesting, you realize that those buds just don't have anywhere the same weight or density as the stuff that got the best light exposure.
You nailed it, man. And that's exactly, you're right. The HPS, or just the HID in general, kind of the king of the uneven canopy. We all know you want that even canopy. And the LED lights, specifically the bar style and the quantum style, all of them, just that flat coverage really tends to promote a flat canopy.
Yeah. And all the analogy that I would often use, it's harder to see it with the light intensity. We'll get onto the sensors now in a minute, but the light intensity directly under a HPS could be 3 or 4 times the intensity, a foot and a half to the side.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to see that visually because it just all looks super bright. But imagine you were watering the plants in the center 4 times as much as you were at the edges, or feeding them 4 times as much in the center as the edges. You would notice that disparity being quite stark. You just can't see it with the light, or you can't. It's hard to detect or measure.
Wow.
So you don't get that same feel for it. But when you test a lot of lights and you got a lot of light sensors and all that stuff, as I do, you get a good sense of that over time, and you probably become more appreciative of the benefits of good light distribution.
Man, that's a really good point, what you said about the feeding, because you would be feeding it different. And at a large scale, it matters less because everything gets, let's be honest, even with HPS, everything gets really even eventually. But for instance, in my little 3x3 tent, you nailed it. Even my 315 watt, some plants it was too much light right under the CMH at the top of my tent. And I don't have the CMH isn't on a dimmable ballast, like a separate ballast where you can dim it. So literally the lowest wattage CMH that I would feasibly get my hands on is too much light in one spot. And that kind of points to your point of it being a dead tech. I still like it. I like my dinosaur car. I like my Flintstones car pedaling with my calloused feet. But man, you nailed it. You really buried you really buried HIDs in this episode, and rightfully so, my friend.
Yeah, I've been a great supporter of them over time. And if you want to get set up quick and etc., they're still reasonably good. But particularly for a smaller size, they're lower efficiency. The lower wattage HPS are much lower efficiency than the 600 watts and the 1000 watts. But they're also relatively expensive now compared to LEDs. So there is almost no argument. Like going back to that Viper Spectra P1000, you can buy them for $100 and they output 100. They'll deliver about 190 micromoles of power. Your HPS will deliver about 150. So, maybe 20-25% less. But I think you'd be struggling to get a decent 150 watt HPS for $100.
Interesting. Well, there you go. So now even the bottom of the line ones are knocking it out. Listen, we're actually coming up against it here. I have one quick question that you must answer before we finish up. And I know what your answer is going to be. Light test apps on your phone, lux meter on your phone. Garbage?
Oh, yeah.
Just utter garbage.
So the problem is it depends on your make and model of phone. So I tried to do comparison testing of those apps. I downloaded 4 or 5 of them. I had 3 phones in front of me, and I would put them in the same situation and they'd all read different results. So, it depends on the aperture on the camera, the sensitivity of the sensor, the way the camera is processing the information. The way the phone is processing the information, and how that feeds into the app. And generally they're just unreliable. There is one, I did and again, it depends on models and all that stuff. I did buy a light meter, a regular Lux light meter has a sensor in it, which if you imagine the power spectrum from blue all the way up to deep red, so from 400 to 700 nanometers, that every part of that spectrum we should consider equal in terms of power. Well, this light sensor from the light sensor that they use in Lux meters the sensitivity falls away up at the far red end and falls away at the far blue end.
Mm-hmm.
In the middle, it measures quite accurately. And that's where most of the light is in modern LEDs.
Oh.
So they were that sensor technology, and it's the one that Hydro Farm use in their power meter. So there's cheap power meters out there which are about $120, sort of $150, and they're basically lux meters just with a different readout.
Wow.
They don't read, as I said, the full power spectrum, but for white light, which tends to not have a whole lot going on in those gaps in the sensor sensitivity, they work quite well for modern white LEDs.
Interesting.
So the Hydro Farms are quite accurate. So they're about $150. I have a hack video on the website, or on the Grow Light MIGRO channel, YouTube channel, of a hack video of buying one of the budget lux sensors from Amazon, like for $20-$25, and you can measure the lux reading, and then I've given you a factor you can multiply it by to get the equivalent power number. And that was quite accurate. I did it on a little curve. I calculated it in Excel, and it all worked out quite accurately.
Wow.
Next step up, unfortunately, is a quantum sensor. Kind of best value one around is by Apogee. It's called the SQ500.
What are they, like $700 or something?
About $350, $400. Yeah.
Okay, all right. That's not bad. Still pretty bad.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. For the smaller grower, it's just not worth it. Right. Just buy a front. And but most manufacturers now, in fairness, most grow light suppliers, they provide power maps. So they show you a map of the light intensity from the light fixture at its recommended hanging height, and they used to be works of fiction, frankly, and very unreliable. And whenever I cross-referenced them, they were usually exaggerating figures. But I have to say, in the last year, 18 months, they are far more accurate.
You're being humble. But what you are the one who's going around there policing. And actually, my understanding is sometimes they thank you and be like, oh, thank you for this accurate power map. We'll use this now. But yeah, dude, that's your work. But to underline your point, for me, it's like between the power map and then just turn up the light as much as you can until don't let your plants show symptoms. That should really be your power reading for me personally. But again, a sensor might help you realize if your light is under power, like if it's wearing out over time or something. But yeah, between the power map and just looking at your plants, I don't think that a lux meter is high on my list. The hack sounds dope though. That sounds like the way to go. Yeah.
By the way, you can buy it. What you can do with the lux meter is so lux is not exactly the same as power, but it's very close, and you can see the relative difference. So you can do little things. You can map out your grow area. You can measure the intensity in the center, the intensity at the edges. You can adjust the height of the light and try to balance those two out. And those readings are legitimate. They're not giving you a power number, but the relative intensity of the readings will be correct. So you can do a bit of optimization with a cheap lux meter, and they're only $20. So at worst, you've burned $20 on Amazon, but Jesus, how often do I do that?
It's a nightly occurrence.
Yeah.
Oh man, this has been wonderful, Shane. All right, guys, MyGrowLight.com. Use code GROWCAST. Limited time offer, 5% off across the board. Only code out there. Enjoy. Thank you, Shane, so much, buddy, for all your work and for the codes for my audience. That makes us feel very special. And I just got to say, thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much, Jordan. Take care.
We got to run, everybody. Be safe and grow smarter. That's our show for today, everybody. Thank you to Shane. So nice of him to reactivate the GrowCast promo code, the only code on the net. Use it at MyGrowLight for a limited time. MyGrowLight.com, that is. Code GrowCast. What a nice guy Shane is for doing that. Before we wrap it up, got to give some love to The Foop. Visit foopcanna.com, foopcanna.com. Use code GrowCast one time and GrowCast forever after that. That's the number 4, EVA. The FOOP bottled liquid plant nutrients. I use them as a bloom booster and a veg booster in my super soil. You can completely replace your nutrient line with them if you're in a more inert medium. A wonderful, fully organic certified additive to your garden. The FOOP, everybody. Code GROWCAST and code GROWCAST forever after that one use. Thank you so much, everybody. Quick shout out to Illinois Canna Consulting, Rich's company, Jay Blanked on SoundCloud for doing the beat, all of the members at patreon.com/growcast, loving membership, and all of you listeners. Stay tuned. I look forward to serving you more with more grow content. Take care, everybody. We'll see you next time.